I swore fidelity on a gray morning in October, beneath stained glass that cast no warmth, and I meant every word even as my heart remained locked behind the vows I spoke. But fidelity, I would learn, is not measured in wedding rings or promises made before witnesses, but in the quiet hours when truth meets consequence, and the world decides what it will believe. My name is Helena Ashford, though most of London knows me as the Duchess of Winterbourne, a title that weighs heavier than any jewel I've ever worn. I am 26 years old, and I have been married for 3 years to a man who regards me with the same distant politeness one might show a portrait on the wall. Beautiful, perhaps, appropriately placed, but ultimately forgettable once the door closes behind you. The Duke, Edward Ashford, is 15 years my senior, a man of rigid principles and even more rigid routines. He rises at 6, takes breakfast at 7, reviews estate correspondence until 9, and spends his days managing investments and attending to matters of Parliament. He comes to my chambers once a month, performs his duty with mechanical precision, and leaves without conversation. We have produced no heir, a fact that his mother, the Dowager Duchess, mentions at every opportunity with thinly veiled disapproval. As if my womb, like everything else about me, has failed to meet the standards of the Ashford name. Our marriage was arranged, of course. My father, a baronet of modest means, saw opportunity in the Duke's need for a young, unblemished bride. I saw escape from a household where I was the eldest of 6 daughters and an increasing burden. The Duke saw a woman of appropriate breeding who would not embarrass him in society. Love was never part of the negotiation. I do not hate my husband. That would require passion, and passion is something we do not indulge in within the walls of Winterbourne House. I simply exist alongside him. 2 people occupying the same grand estate, sharing meals in silence, appearing together at the necessary social functions, and maintaining the illusion of a proper aristocratic union. The servants whisper, I'm certain, about the separate bedchambers, the lack of warmth between us, the way the Duke looks through me rather than at me. But whispers are easy to ignore when you've grown accustomed to being invisible. London in the autumn of 1889 was particularly beautiful that year. The fog came early, rolling through the streets like something alive, softening the harsh edges of the city and wrapping the gas lamps in halos of golden light. I loved those foggy mornings, the way they transformed the familiar into something mysterious, the way they muffled sound and made the world feel smaller, more intimate. Sometimes, when the Duke was away on business, I would walk through Regent's Park with only my maid, Sarah, and pretend I was someone else entirely, someone free. It was on such a morning in late October that the first theft occurred. Lady Pemberton, a fixture of London society and a woman known for her legendary jewelry collection, arrived at our house in a state of near hysteria. She swept into our drawing room like a ship in full sail, her silk gown rustling, her face flushed beneath her elaborate hat. I was taking tea alone, as I usually did at that hour, and her entrance startled me so thoroughly that I nearly dropped my cup. She is dead, Lady Pemberton announced without preamble, collapsing onto the settee across from me. Murdered, Helena. Murdered in her own home, and her jewels are gone. I set down my teacup carefully, my mind struggling to process her words. Who is dead, Lady Pemberton? Mrs. Catherine Wickliffe, she said, pressing a gloved hand to her chest as if to steady her racing heart. They found her this morning. Her throat had been cut, and her safe was emptied. Every piece, Helena, diamonds, sapphires, emeralds, a fortune, gone. And the police say it's connected to the other thefts, the ones that have been plaguing Mayfair these past 2 months. I had heard whispers of the thefts, of course. It was impossible not to, given how society thrived on scandal and misfortune. Several prominent families had reported valuables missing, jewelry mostly, taken from supposedly secure locations within their homes. No signs of forced entry, no disrupted servants, just missing items and a growing sense of unease among London's elite. But this was different. This was murder. The Duke must be informed, I said quietly, though my hands trembled slightly as I reached for the bell pull to summon a servant. He will want to increase security here. Lady Pemberton leaned forward, her eyes wide with fear and something else, something almost hungry. They're saying the thief is someone we know, Helena. Someone who moves freely in our circles, who is invited into our homes. How else could they access safes and locked rooms without detection? We are none of us safe. She left shortly after, swept away by her driver to spread the news to other households, and I sat alone in the drawing room, staring at the cold fireplace and feeling the first stirrings of real fear. A murderer, loose in our world. Someone who walked among us, smiled at us, danced with us, and then stole into our homes like a shadow. The Duke returned that evening and listened to my account of Lady Pemberton's visit with his usual impassive expression. He made arrangements immediately, doubling the night watch, instructing our butler to keep detailed logs of all visitors, and forbidding me from receiving callers without his explicit knowledge. I was to remain at home, he informed me, until the matter was resolved. For my safety, he said, though I suspected it was more for his reputation. A duchess involved in a scandal, even peripherally, was unacceptable. The investigation began 3 days later when Inspector William Hargrave of Scotland Yard arrived at Winterbourne House. I remember that afternoon with perfect clarity. It was November now, and the air had turned bitter. I was in the music room, playing the pianoforte, my fingers moving through a Chopin nocturne with more emotion than technical precision. Music was my only rebellion, the only place where I could express the feelings that had no outlet in my carefully controlled life. The notes filled the room, sad and beautiful, and for a few moments, I forgot about murdered women and missing jewels and the cold, empty house that was my prison. The door opened, and I stopped playing immediately, my hands freezing above the keys. The Duke stood in the doorway, and beside him was a man I had never seen before. He was tall, perhaps 35 years old, with dark hair that needed trimming and eyes the color of slate. He wore a simple black suit, well-tailored but not fashionable, and he carried himself with a quiet authority that suggested he was accustomed to walking into grand houses and asking uncomfortable questions. His face was angular, intelligent, and when his gaze met mine, I felt something shift in the air between us, something I could not name but recognized nonetheless. "Helena," the Duke said, his voice betraying no emotion. "This is Inspector Hargrave. He is investigating the recent thefts and the murder of Mrs. Wycliffe. He wishes to ask you some questions about the social circle we move in." I rose from the piano bench, smoothing my gown with hands that I willed to remain steady. "Of course," I said. "How may I assist you, Inspector?" The Duke excused himself, citing business matters that required his attention, and left us alone. Protocol dictated that a maid should remain present, but I found myself strangely unwilling to summon one. The inspector walked slowly around the room, his eyes taking in the paintings on the walls, the elaborate furnishings, the pianoforte with its sheet music still open to the Chopin piece. "You play beautifully," he said, his voice low and surprisingly gentle. That was the nocturne in E-flat major, if I'm not mistaken. I was startled by his knowledge. "You recognize Chopin, Inspector?" He smiled, a quick flash of warmth that transformed his serious face. "My mother was a music teacher before she married. She insisted all her children learn to appreciate it, even if we lacked the talent to perform. That particular nocturne was her favorite. There was something in the way he spoke of his mother, a tenderness that seemed at odds with his profession, with the dark purpose that had brought him to my home. I found myself curious about him in a way I had not been curious about anyone in years. "Please sit," I said, gesturing to the chairs arranged near the window. "How may I help with your investigation?" He sat, withdrawing a small notebook from his jacket pocket. "I need to understand the social dynamics of your circle, Your Grace. Who attends the same events? Who has access to these homes? Who might have knowledge of where valuables are kept?" For the next hour, I answered his questions. I told him about the balls and dinner parties, about who was invited where, about the gossip and alliances that governed our world. He listened intently, occasionally making notes, and I found myself speaking more freely than I had in months, perhaps years. He did not interrupt or judge, simply listened with those intelligent gray eyes fixed on mine. "And you, Your Grace," he said finally, "do you attend many of these events?" I hesitated. "The Duke prefers that I represent the family at certain functions," I said carefully, "but he does not enjoy society himself, so I often go alone or with Lady Pemberton as my companion." "You go alone to evening events?" he asked, his tone neutral, but his eyes sharp. "With my maid, always," I clarified quickly. "But yes, often without my husband." He made another note, and I felt a small twist of anxiety. Was there something wrong with that? Did it make me appear suspicious? "One more question, if you'll permit it," he said, closing his notebook. "On the night Mrs. Wycliffe was murdered, October 28th, can you tell me where you were?" My breath caught. "I was here," I said. "At home. The Duke had guests for dinner, other gentlemen from Parliament. I took supper in my chambers and retired early." "And no one can corroborate that?" "My maid, Sarah, would have been with me until I dismissed her for the night." "And the Duke's guests were in the house, though I did not see them personally." He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Your Grace. You've been very helpful." He rose, and I rose with him, feeling suddenly reluctant to see him leave. There was something about his presence, about the way he listened, that made me feel seen in a way I had not felt since my wedding day, as if I were a person of substance rather than simply a title and a face. "Inspector," I said as he reached the door, "will you catch whoever did this?" He turned back to me, and for a moment his professional mask slipped. I saw weariness there, and determination, and something else I could not quite identify. "I will do everything in my power to see justice done, Your Grace," he said quietly. "You have my word." After he left, I returned to the piano, but my fingers would not cooperate. The notes sounded hollow, discordant, as if the music itself had been disrupted by his visit. I sat there for a long time, staring at the keys and thinking about slate-gray eyes and a man who knew Chopin and listened as if my words mattered. That night, I could not sleep. The house was silent except for the distant ticking of clocks and the occasional creak of old wood settling. I lay in my bed, staring at the canopy above me, and thought about Catherine Wycliffe, a woman I had known only slightly, now dead in her own home. I thought about the thief who moved through our world like a ghost, and I thought, despite myself, about the inspector with his careful questions and his mother who loved nocturnes. At some point past midnight, I heard voices in the corridor outside my room, male voices, low and urgent. I slipped from my bed and pressed my ear to the door, but I could not make out the words. Footsteps passed by, fading toward the main staircase, and then silence returned. I should have climbed back into bed. I should have dismissed it as simply the Duke conducting business, as he so often did at odd hours. But something compelled me forward, something I could not name. I opened my door and peered into the dim hallway, lit only by a single gas lamp at the far end. The house felt different at night, larger somehow, full of shadows and secrets. I moved quietly toward the main staircase, my bare feet silent on the carpet runner, my nightgown ghostly white in the darkness. I reached the landing and looked down into the entrance hall below. Two figures stood near the front door, speaking in hushed tones. One was our butler, Mr. Grimshaw. The other, I realized with a start, was Inspector Hargrave. What was he doing here, at this hour? Had the Duke summoned him for some reason? I strained to hear their conversation, but they were too far away, their voices too low. Then the inspector turned, his face briefly illuminated by the lamp above the door, and something in his expression made my heart beat faster. There was tension there, urgency, as if matters had taken a turn he had not anticipated. Mr. Grimshaw opened the door, and the inspector stepped out into the night. The door closed with a soft click, and the butler turned, his gaze sweeping upward toward the staircase. I pulled back quickly, pressing myself against the wall, praying he had not seen me. I waited, my breath shallow, until I heard his footsteps retreating toward the servants' quarters. Only then did I return to my room, my mind racing with questions I could not answer. Why had the inspector been here so late? What had he discussed with our butler? And why did I feel, with an instinct I could not explain, that something had shifted, that the careful order of my world was about to shatter in ways I could not yet imagine? I climbed back into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, and tried to calm my racing heart. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the window panes and carrying with it the smell of coming rain. London was restless tonight, full of secrets and shadows, and I was beginning to understand that I was more entangled in its dark web than I had ever suspected. Sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams of gray eyes and locked rooms and voices whispering accusations I could not quite hear. And when I woke the next morning to Sarah drawing back my curtains, I felt as if I had been running all night, fleeing from something that was drawing closer with every passing hour. The Duke was already gone when I came down for breakfast, Mr. Grimshaw informed me. He had left early for the city and would not return until evening. I took my meal alone in the breakfast room, staring at the newspaper without really seeing the words, my mind still caught on the image of the inspector standing in our entrance hall in the middle of the night. "Your Grace," Mr. Grimshaw said, appearing in the doorway with a silver tray, "a message has arrived for you." I took the folded paper, noting the Duke's seal pressed into the wax. I broke it open and read the brief lines written in his precise hand. "Helena, you are to expect a visit from Inspector Hargrave this afternoon. He has additional questions regarding the investigation. You will answer him fully and honestly. Any failure to cooperate will reflect poorly on this family. Edward." I set the letter down, my hands trembling slightly. Additional questions. What could he possibly need to ask me that we had not already covered? And why did the Duke's tone seem almost threatening, as if he suspected me of something? The afternoon arrived too quickly. I dressed carefully, choosing a high-necked day gown in deep blue, my hair arranged simply but elegantly. I wanted to appear composed, above suspicion, a proper duchess who had nothing to hide. But when Mr. Grimshaw announced Inspector Hargrave's arrival, and I walked into the drawing room to find him standing by the window, all my careful composure threatened to crumble. He looked tired, I noticed, as if he had not slept well. There were shadows beneath his eyes, and his jaw was tight with tension. He turned when I entered, and something passed across his face too quickly for me to read. "Inspector," I said, keeping my voice steady, "my husband informed me you had more questions." He did not sit, and neither did I. We stood facing each other across the expensive carpet, the afternoon light filtering through the lace curtains and casting patterns on the floor between us. "Your Grace," he said, his voice careful, controlled, "I need you to be completely honest with me. This is a matter of the utmost gravity." My throat tightened. "Of course, Inspector, I have nothing to hide." He withdrew his notebook, but he did not open it. Instead, he held my gaze with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. "On the night of November 7th, 3 nights ago, where were you between the hours of 2 and 3 in the morning?" November 7th, 3 nights ago, the night I had heard voices and seen him speaking with Mr. Grimshaw in the entrance hall. "I was asleep in my chambers," I said. "Why do you ask?" He took a breath, and I saw him steel himself for what came next. "Because the gate log from your estate's entrance records a departure at 2:11 that morning. And the entry identifies you, Lady Helena Ashford, Duchess of Winterbourne, as the person who left the property at that hour." The room tilted. I reached for the back of a chair to steady myself. "That's impossible," I whispered. I was in my room, I never left the house. The log also records a return entry at 4:33 in the morning, he continued, his voice soft but relentless. And according to the night porter at my lodgings, a woman matching your description entered the building at approximately 2:30 and left just after 4. My legs gave out, and I sank into the chair, my mind reeling. Someone had used my name, my identity, to enter his room. Someone had gone to where he lived in the middle of the night and created evidence that I had been there. "Inspector," I said, my voice shaking, "I swear to you, I did not leave this house that night. I do not even know where you live. This is some mistake, some terrible misunderstanding." But even as I spoke the words, I saw the doubt in his eyes. Because what reason would he have to believe me? The evidence was there, written in official logs, corroborated by a witness. A duchess who had sworn fidelity to her husband, recorded as entering a bachelor inspector's room at 2:11 in the morning. The scandal, when it broke, would destroy everything. My reputation, my marriage, whatever fragile peace I had managed to maintain in my carefully controlled existence. And worse, far worse, it would cast suspicion on both of us in a murder investigation where trust was already in dangerously short supply. "Your Grace," Inspector Hargrave said quietly, his professional mask firmly back in place. "I think you need to tell me everything, because someone has gone to great lengths to place you in my room that night. And until we understand why, you are in considerable danger." I looked up at him, at this man I barely knew, and realized with a cold clarity that my life, as I had known it, was over. Someone had stolen my identity and used it to create a lie, and in doing so, they had bound me to this inspector in a way that society would never forgive, and that I was only beginning to understand might be exactly what they had intended all along. The inspector waited while I tried to gather my scattered thoughts, his presence filling the drawing room with a tension that made the air feel thin. I could hear the clock on the mantelpiece ticking, each second marking the passage of time I did not have, the narrowing of options I could not afford to lose. "I need to see the log," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. "If someone used my name, there must be something there, some detail that proves it wasn't me." Inspector Hargrave studied me for a long moment, and I could not tell if he believed me or was simply allowing me enough rope to hang myself with. "Very well," he said, "but we must be discreet. If word of this spreads before we understand what happened, the damage will be irreparable." He did not need to elaborate. A duchess accused of infidelity, of visiting a bachelor inspector in the dead of night, would be ruined regardless of the truth. Society did not forgive such scandals, did not wait for evidence or explanation. The whisper was enough, the suggestion sufficient to destroy a reputation built on propriety and appearances. "When can I see it?" I asked. "Tonight," he said. "After dark. I'll arrange for a carriage to collect you from the servants' entrance at 9 o'clock. Tell no one where you're going." "The Duke will expect me at dinner," I said, already thinking through the complications. "He keeps a very strict household routine." "Then find an excuse," Inspector Hargrave said, his tone brooking no argument. "Your Grace, someone has gone to considerable trouble to implicate both of us in something. Until we know who and why, you cannot trust anyone in this house. Not your servants, not your husband, not even his mother." The thought sent ice through my veins. "You think someone here is responsible?" "I think someone with intimate knowledge of your movements and access to your household is responsible," he said carefully. "The log was falsified using details only someone close to you would know. Your full name and title. The precise timing that would place you leaving here and arriving at my lodgings. This wasn't random, Your Grace. This was planned." After he left, I sat alone in the drawing room for a long time, trying to make sense of what had happened. Who in my household would want to destroy me? Who had reason to connect me to Inspector Hargrave in such a damaging way? The servants had always been loyal, or so I believed. The Duke had no reason to sabotage his own reputation through my scandal. And yet, someone had done this, had stolen into the night wearing my identity like a costume and created evidence of a betrayal I had never committed. Sarah found me there an hour later, still sitting in the same chair, my hands folded in my lap, and my mind turning over possibilities like cards in a game I did not know I was playing. "Your Grace," she said softly, "are you unwell? You look pale." I turned to her, this young woman who had been with me since my marriage, who brushed my hair each night and knew my moods better than anyone. Could I trust her? Or was she, too, part of whatever web had been spun around me? "I'm fine, Sarah," I said. "Just tired. I think I'll rest before dinner." She helped me to my chambers, her chatter filling the silence with gossip about the other servants and news from the market. I listened without really hearing, my mind already on the evening ahead and what I might discover in that gate log. If someone had impersonated me, surely there would be differences, details that would prove it was not truly me who had left that night. The Duke arrived home at 6, and we took dinner together in the formal dining room, a vast space that made conversation nearly impossible across the length of polished mahogany. He spoke briefly about parliamentary matters, his tone detached and perfunctory, and I responded with the appropriate murmurs of interest. He did not mention the inspector's visit, did not ask what questions had been posed. It was as if the entire investigation existed in a separate world from our marriage, unworthy of discussion at our table. "I need to visit Lady Pemberton this evening," I said as dessert was cleared. "She sent word that she's quite distraught about Mrs. Wycliffe's death and needs company." The Duke looked up from his port, his expression mildly disapproving. "Is it appropriate to go out so late?" "She's a widow and very alone," I said, keeping my voice gentle and concerned. "I thought it my duty as her friend to provide comfort." He considered this, his aristocratic features giving away nothing. "Very well, but take the carriage and return by midnight. I won't have you wandering the city at all hours." "Of course," I said, relief flooding through me. "Thank you, Edward." He nodded, already returning his attention to his drink, and I excused myself to prepare. The lie sat bitter on my tongue, but I swallowed it down along with the guilt. What choice did I have? To tell him the truth would be to reveal the scandal before I understood it, to open myself to his judgment and the inevitable consequences of being accused without defense. Sarah helped me dress in a simple evening gown, dark green with modest trim, appropriate for a visit to a grieving friend. She arranged my hair and draped a heavy cloak over my shoulders, and I saw in the mirror a woman who looked calm and composed, nothing like the terrified creature I felt myself becoming inside. At 9 o'clock precisely, I slipped out through the servants' entrance as instructed. A plain carriage waited in the shadows, no ducal crest on the door, no liveried driver visible. The door opened as I approached, and Inspector Hargrave's hand reached out to help me inside. The carriage was small and dark, lit only by a single lamp that cast his face in sharp relief. We sat across from each other, our knees nearly touching in the confined space, and I was suddenly, acutely aware of how improper this was, how the very thing I was trying to disprove, I was now enacting. A married duchess, alone with a bachelor inspector, riding through London in an unmarked carriage. "Are you well, Your Grace?" he asked, his voice low and surprisingly gentle. "I'm terrified," I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "I don't understand what's happening or why someone would do this to me." "To us," he corrected quietly. "If this scandal breaks, we're both ruined. You for infidelity, me for conduct unbecoming. They'll say I seduced you, used my position to gain access to your household and your person. And did you?" The question escaped me before I could think better of it. His eyes met mine in the lamplight, and I saw something there that made my breath catch. "No, Your Grace, I did not. Though I confess, when I met you that first afternoon, I found myself thinking of you more than was strictly professional. The admission hung in the air between us, dangerous and impossible to take back. I should have been offended, should have demanded he maintain proper distance. Instead, I found myself drawn to his honesty, to the crack in his professional armor that revealed something human and vulnerable beneath. The carriage stopped, and he helped me down into a narrow street I did not recognize. The building before us was respectable, but modest, a lodging house for professional men of limited means. We entered through a side door, climbing a narrow staircase to the third floor where his rooms were located. Inside, his apartment was spare but orderly. A small sitting room with a desk covered in papers, a bedroom visible through an open door, bookshelves lining one wall. It smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather, masculine and oddly comforting. He lit 2 additional lamps, brightening the space, and retrieved a leather folder from his desk. "This is the gate log from your estate," he said, laying it open before me. "And this is the entry from my lodging house." I leaned over the documents, my hands trembling as I traced the lines written in careful script. There it was, exactly as he had described. Lady Helena Ashford, Duchess of Winterbourne, departed Winterbourne House at 2:11 on the morning of November 7th. And in the lodging house log, a female visitor, Duchess of Winterbourne, signed in at 2:30. "The handwriting," I said, pointing to the signature. "That's not mine. Look at how the letters slope." He pulled out another document, one I recognized as my response to his initial questions during our first meeting. He laid them side by side, comparing the handwriting. "You're right," he said slowly. "The hand is similar, but not identical. The forger was skilled, but not perfect. So someone practiced my signature well enough to fool a cursory inspection," I said, hope rising in my chest. "That proves it wasn't me. It suggests it," he corrected. "But it doesn't prove who did it or why. And more importantly, it doesn't change what the logs say. In the eyes of society, if this becomes known, you were in my rooms for 2 hours in the middle of the night." I sank into the chair near his desk, my mind racing. "Who has access to samples of my handwriting?" I asked. "Who could have practiced my signature without me knowing?" He pulled out his notebook, the one he always carried. "Your household staff would have the greatest access. Letters you've written, correspondence you've signed. But it could also be someone at one of the social events you attend, someone who had opportunity to see your signature on guest books or calling cards." "The list is impossibly long," I said, despair creeping back in. "Half of London society could have managed it." "Not half of London knew you were home that night," he countered. "Whoever did this needed to know your schedule, your husband's schedule, when the servants change shifts, which entrance is least watched. This person is close to you, Your Grace. Close enough to move through your life like a ghost." A thought struck me, cold and terrible. Mrs. Wycliffe, the woman who was murdered. Could this be connected? Could whoever killed her have planted this evidence to distract from the investigation? Inspector Hargrave moved to the window, looking out at the London streets below. "It's possible," he said. "The timeline fits. Mrs. Wycliffe was murdered on October 28th. The thefts have been ongoing for 2 months. This false entry was made 3 nights ago, just as I was closing in on certain leads." "What leads?" I asked, rising from the chair. He turned back to me, and I saw the conflict in his expression, the battle between his duty to keep investigative details confidential and his growing need to trust me with the truth. "There's a pattern to the thefts," he said finally. "All the targeted homes have one thing in common. They employed the same domestic agency for temporary staff within the past 6 months." "Which agency?" "Hartwick and Sons," he said. "They provide maids, footmen, kitchen help for short-term needs." Every house that was robbed had used their services. "And Winterbourne House?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the dread pooling in my stomach. "You hired 2 temporary maids from them last spring," he confirmed, "for the season, when you needed additional help with entertaining." I remembered them. 2 young women whose names I had barely learned before they moved on to other positions. But they would have had access to the entire house, would have seen the layouts, the locations of safes and valuables, my daily routines and signature. "So you think the thefts are inside jobs," I said, Someone at this agency providing information or access to a thief. I think it's more than that, he said quietly. I think someone at that agency is the thief. And I think Mrs. Wycliffe discovered something, saw something that got her killed. When I started investigating Hartwick and Sons 3 days ago, this false log entry appeared. Suddenly, I'm not just an inspector investigating a case. I'm a man compromised by a scandal, my credibility destroyed, my investigation called into question. And I'm the weapon they chose to use against you, I said bitterly. A duchess with everything to lose, perfectly positioned to take us both down. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his hands gripping my shoulders with an intensity that made me gasp. Listen to me, he said, his voice fierce. We are going to find who did this. We're going to prove your innocence and catch a murderer. But I need you to be brave, Your Grace. Braver than society expects a duchess to be. I looked up at him, at his gray eyes burning with determination, and felt something shift deep in my chest. For 3 years, I had been nothing more than a decoration in the Duke's household, a pretty ornament with no real purpose or power. But this man, this inspector from a world so different from mine, saw something in me that I had almost forgotten existed. He saw a woman capable of fighting back. Tell me what to do, I said. First, we need a list of everyone in your household who had access to samples of your handwriting, he said, releasing me and returning to his desk. Second, we need to find out who at Hartwick and Sons might have reason to frame us. And third, he paused, his jaw tightening. We need to be prepared for the possibility that this scandal will break before we solve the case. If it does, I said quietly, I lose everything. My marriage, my position, my reputation. The Duke will divorce me, and I'll be cast out of society. Then we make certain it doesn't come to that, he said. But Your Grace, you need to understand something. If we're seen together, if anyone discovers you've been here tonight, it makes everything worse. I know, I said, but I had no choice. I needed to see the evidence for myself. He studied me for a long moment, and I saw the conflict in his expression. I'm going to send word to my lodging housekeeper that I've moved out for a few weeks, he said. I'll tell her I'm staying with family outside the city. That way, if anyone comes asking about that night, she'll have no reason to repeat her story. It's not much, but it might buy us time. Thank you, I whispered. We spent the next hour going through details. He showed me his notes on the investigation, the pattern of thefts, the list of households targeted. I provided what information I could about the people in those houses, the social connections, the gossip that might reveal motive or opportunity. It felt strange, this partnership, a duchess and an inspector working side by side like equals. Strange, but also right in a way I could not explain. When it was time to leave, he escorted me back to the carriage. The fog had thickened, turning London into a landscape of shadows and muffled sound. I pulled my cloak tighter, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I was, how exposed. Your Grace, he said as he helped me into the carriage, be careful. Watch who you trust. If my suspicions are correct, the person behind this is closer than you think. I will, I promised. And Inspector, I paused, unsure how to express what I was feeling. Thank you for believing me. I haven't cleared you yet, he said, but there was warmth in his voice that belied the words. I'm investigating all possibilities. But yes, I believe you. Call it instinct, or perhaps just foolishness, but I believe you. The carriage pulled away, and I watched through the small window as his figure disappeared into the fog. My heart was beating too fast, my thoughts a tangle of fear and something else, something I did not dare name. I was a married woman, bound by vows I had meant sincerely, even if they had been exchanged without love. But tonight, sitting in his sparse rooms, working beside him as an equal, I had felt more alive than I had in 3 years of marriage. The carriage delivered me back to Winterbourne House through the servants' entrance as arranged. I slipped inside, expecting the corridors to be empty, but as I removed my cloak, I heard voices from the main hallway. The Duke's voice, raised slightly in irritation, and another voice I recognized with a sinking feeling. The Dowager Duchess had arrived. I froze, my cloak half off, listening to her imperious tone complaining about the late hour and the poor state of the roads. She had not been expected tonight. Her visits were usually announced days in advance, a courtesy she insisted upon as befitting her rank. Her sudden appearance could not be coincidence. Sarah appeared at my elbow, her face pale. "Your Grace," she whispered urgently. "The Dowager arrived an hour ago. She's been asking for you. The Duke told her you were visiting Lady Pemberton, but I fear she doesn't believe him." "Help me change quickly," I said, my mind racing. "I need to look as if I've been sitting in a parlor, not riding through London in a carriage." We hurried to my chambers, Sarah's hands swift and efficient as she arranged my hair and switched my gown for something more appropriate for receiving family. I descended the main staircase 5 minutes later, my demeanor calm and my smile pleasant, as if I had not a care in the world. The Dowager Duchess sat in the formal drawing room, her posture rigid and her expression carved from ice. She was 72 years old, a woman who had outlived 2 husbands and ruled her social sphere with absolute authority. She wore black, as she always did, her mourning for the second Duke having apparently become permanent, and her eyes were sharp as they swept over me from head to toe. "Helena," she said, her voice cold, "how good of you to finally return." "Mother," I said, using the title she insisted upon, though we shared no blood. "I apologize for not being here to greet you. Had I known you were coming, I would have stayed home." "Lady Pemberton," she said, the name dripping with skepticism. "I stopped by her house on my way here. She was quite surprised to hear she had summoned you tonight. In fact, she claimed she had not seen you in 3 days. The trap closed around me like a snare, quick and efficient. I felt the blood drain from my face, felt the room tilt slightly as the implications became clear. She had checked my alibi. She had deliberately gone to Lady Pemberton's house to verify my story. "I must have misunderstood her message," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Perhaps I was confused about which evening she needed company." The Dowager's eyes narrowed. "Or perhaps you were somewhere quite different. Somewhere you should not have been. Somewhere that would be most inappropriate for a duchess of this family." The Duke entered the room, his expression troubled. "Mother," he said, "please. Helena has explained herself." "Has she?" the Dowager asked, not taking her eyes from mine. "Then perhaps she can explain why the night porter at my building, a building I know she is familiar with from charity visits, claims to have seen her entering a private lodging house at 2:30 this morning. A building where young professional men reside. Bachelors, Helena, unmarried men. My world fractured. She knew. Somehow, impossibly, she knew. Not just about tonight, but about 3 nights ago. She had been watching me or having me watched, and she had discovered the one piece of evidence that could destroy everything. "That's impossible," I said, but my voice was too weak, too desperate. "I was home that night, in my chambers. The porter knows you by sight," the Dowager continued relentlessly. "He described your cloak, your bearing, and there is a log, Helena, a visitor log with your signature." I looked at the Duke, hoping for some shred of support, some willingness to believe me over his mother's accusations. But his face was closed, his eyes cold with disappointment, and, I thought, a hint of relief. As if this scandal, this proof of my unfaithfulness, freed him from whatever obligation he had felt toward our marriage. "Edward," I said, my voice breaking, "I swear to you, I did not betray you. Someone is framing me. Someone is using my identity to destroy us both." The Dowager rose from her chair, her full height impressive despite her age. "You will pack your things," she announced, "tonight. You will remove yourself from this house and go to the Dowager cottage on the estate in Hertfordshire. You will remain there while we decide what is to be done with you. If you resist, if you breathe a word of scandal to anyone, I will see to it that you are not only divorced, but utterly ruined. Your family will be cut off from all society. Your father's title will become worthless. Do I make myself clear? Perfectly clear, I whispered. The Duke said nothing, simply stood there, looking at me as if I were a stranger who had somehow found her way into his house. And perhaps that is what I was. I had never been his wife, not truly. I had been a placeholder, a decorative element meant to fulfill a social function. Now that I had failed to maintain the appearance of perfection, I had no value left to offer. I turned and walked from the room, my head high and my back straight, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. But inside, I was screaming, falling, shattering into pieces too small to ever be reassembled. In the span of one evening, I had gone from duchess to exile, from a woman with status, if not happiness, to a woman with nothing at all. Sarah met me in my chambers, tears streaming down her face as she began packing my belongings. I stood at the window, looking out at the fog-shrouded gardens, and thought about Inspector Hargrave. He had warned me to be careful, had told me the person behind this was close. But he had not known how close, had not suspected that the Dowager herself might be watching my every move, waiting for me to make a mistake she could use to cast me out. Or perhaps, I thought with sudden clarity, it was not a mistake at all. Perhaps this had always been the plan. To frame me with the inspector, to force me from the house, to clear the way for something or someone else. But what? And who would benefit from my exile? The questions haunted me as Sarah packed my trunks. As the hours crept toward dawn, as I prepared to leave the only home I had known since my marriage. Tomorrow, I would be sent away to a cottage in the countryside, isolated and alone. But tonight, I made myself a promise. I would find the truth, no matter what it cost me. I would prove my innocence and uncover who had done this to me. And when I did, when I finally held all the pieces of this terrible puzzle, I would make certain that justice was served. The inspector believed in me. That knowledge, small and fragile as it was, gave me strength. Somewhere in this dark city, William Hargrave was still investigating, still searching for answers. And somehow, despite the exile that awaited me, I would find a way to help him. Because my reputation was already destroyed, but the truth was still out there waiting to be found, and I would not stop until I held it in my hands. The Dowager cottage sat at the edge of the Winterbourne estate, 3 miles from the main house and surrounded by woods that pressed close like disapproving witnesses. It was not a cottage in the way common people understood the word, but rather a substantial stone house with 8 rooms, a small staff of 2 elderly servants, and an air of genteel abandonment. Previous duchesses had been sent here when they fell from favor, when they failed to produce heirs or committed social transgressions that required temporary exile. Now it was my prison, wrapped in November cold and the whisper of dead leaves. I arrived at dawn, exhausted from a night without sleep and a 2-hour carriage ride through fog that never seemed to lift. The servants, Mr. and Mrs. Brennan, were kind in their distant way, showing me to the main bedroom and unpacking my trunks without comment. They had seen disgraced duchesses before, I supposed. I was simply the latest in a long line of women who had disappointed the Ashford family. Sarah had not been allowed to accompany me. The Dowager had been clear about that. I was to have no connection to my former life, no loyal maid who might carry messages or maintain my links to London society. I was to be isolated, cut off, and forced to reflect on my sins until the family decided what permanent solution to impose upon me. But isolation, I discovered, had unexpected advantages. Without the constant surveillance of the main house, without the Duke's rigid schedules and the Dowager's watchful presence, I had freedom I had never possessed before. Freedom to think, to plan, and to find a way to communicate with the one person who might help me prove the truth. I spent the first 3 days exploring my new domain. The cottage had a small library, dusty and neglected, filled with books that previous occupants had left behind. I found novels and poetry, household management guides from decades past, and, tucked behind a volume of sermons, a map of the estate with all the roads and paths marked in fading ink. I studied that map carefully, tracing routes between the cottage and the main house, between the estate and the village, between my prison and the wider world. On the fourth day, Mrs. Brennan mentioned that a tradesman came once a week from the village, bringing supplies and taking orders for anything needed. He arrived on Thursdays, she said, always punctual, always discreet. The family preferred to keep the cottage stocked, but forgotten, a convenient place to hide inconvenient women. Thursday, then, would be my opportunity. I wrote a letter to Inspector Hargrave, carefully worded to sound innocent if intercepted, but clear enough that he would understand. I spoke of my concern for Lady Pemberton, alone in her grief, and asked if he might know how she fared. I mentioned that I was staying in the countryside for my health at the Dowager Cottage near Berkhamsted, and would welcome any news from London. I signed it simply Helena. No title, no ducal seal. Just a woman reaching across the void to the one person who knew the truth. When the tradesman arrived, a weather-worn man of middle years who introduced himself as Mr. Pettigrew, I pressed the letter into his hand along with a coin. "For a friend in London," I said quietly. "It's quite urgent." He looked at the address I had written, his expression carefully neutral. "I'll see it delivered, Your Grace," he said, pocketing both letter and coin. Discreetly, as always. After he left, I stood at the window and watched his cart disappear down the rutted lane, carrying my hope with it. Either the inspector would receive my message and find some way to respond, or I would remain here in exile, helpless while whoever had framed us continued their plan unchecked. I tried not to think about the second possibility, tried to maintain the fragile faith that I was not alone in this fight. The days that followed were long and strange. I walked the grounds despite the cold, finding paths through the woods that led to forgotten corners of the estate. I read voraciously, anything to occupy my mind and keep despair at bay. And I waited, watching the lane for any sign of a response, any indication that my message had reached its destination. 6 days after I had sent the letter, Mr. Pettigrew returned. He brought the usual supplies, carried them to the kitchen under Mrs. Brennan's supervision, and then, as he was leaving, he paused by the door where I stood. "A package for you, Your Grace," he said, his voice low, "from a bookseller in London. You'd mentioned wanting some new reading material." I had mentioned no such thing, but I took the wrapped parcel with steady hands and thanked him calmly. Only after he had gone did I retreat to my room and tear open the paper with trembling fingers. Inside was a copy of Wilkie Collins's The Woman in White, a novel I had read years ago about mistaken identity and conspiracy. But tucked between the pages was a folded letter written in a hand I recognized from the inspector's notebook. "Your Grace," it read, "I received your message. I cannot come to you directly without risking further scandal, but I have made progress in the investigation that I believe you should know. The domestic agency, Hartwick & Sons, is not what it appears. The owner, Mr. Gerald Hartwick, died last year. His son Thomas inherited the business, but records show he has been running it into the ground. Debts, poor management, complaints from clients. The thefts began 6 months after he took control. I believe he discovered a way to profit from the access his agency provides, using his employees to gather information about wealthy households and then either stealing himself or selling information to others. But here is where it becomes more complex. Thomas Hartwick has a sister, Miss Constance Hartwick. She works as a companion to elderly ladies of society, moving from house to house, trusted and invisible. 3 months ago, she served as companion to your husband's mother, the Dowager Duchess. I stopped reading, my heart pounding. Constance Hartwick had been in the Dowager's household. She would have had access to information about me, about the family, about schedules and routines. And if her brother was behind the thefts, if they were working together, then they would have had both the means and the opportunity to frame me. But why? Why target me specifically? Why create evidence linking me to the inspector investigating their crimes? I read on. I believe Miss Hartwick discovered that I was closing in on her brother's operation. When I began investigating the pattern of thefts and their connection to the agency, someone needed to discredit me before I could make arrests. What better way than to create a scandal involving a duchess? Society would focus on the impropriety rather than the investigation, and my findings would be dismissed as the desperate accusations of a man trying to deflect from his own misconduct. You were chosen, I believe, because you are visible, vulnerable, and connected to multiple households that were targeted. Your exile works in their favor. It removes you from London society where you might hear things, notice things that could help the investigation. It silences you effectively while appearing to be your own fault. I am working to gather enough evidence to make arrests, but I need proof of their direct involvement in the murder of Mrs. Wycliffe. I believe she recognized Miss Hartwick as someone who should not have been in her house, or perhaps she noticed something stolen and connected it to the companion who had visited weeks earlier. Whatever she knew, it got her killed. Be careful, Your Grace. If my theory is correct, the Dowager may not be as innocent in your exile as she appears. Ask yourself, who benefits from you being removed from the family? Who gains from the scandal and your disgrace? I will send word when I have more information. In the meantime, trust no one, especially not those who claim to act in your best interest. The letter was unsigned, but I needed no signature to know who had written it. I read it 3 more times, my mind racing with the implications. Miss Constance Hartwick, companion to the Dowager, perfectly positioned to gather information and to forge a plan that would destroy me while protecting her brother's criminal enterprise. But the final question haunted me most. Who benefits from my removal? The Duke, perhaps, freed from a wife who had never pleased his mother and never produced an heir. But he had seemed genuinely surprised by the scandal, genuinely disappointed rather than calculating. The Dowager, then? But what could she possibly gain from exiling me except the satisfaction of being proven right about her son's poor choice of bride? I tucked the letter inside my bodice, close to my heart where no servant could find it, and tried to think through the puzzle. Mrs. Wycliffe had been murdered. The thefts were connected to Hartwick and Sons. Miss Constance Hartwick had access to the Dowager's household. The false gate log had been created 3 nights after the inspector began investigating the agency. And I had been exiled, removed from society, and silenced, all under the guise of protecting the family's reputation. There was something I was missing, some piece that would make all of this coherent. I could feel it hovering just beyond my understanding, a shape in the fog that refused to become clear. That evening, as I sat in the cottage library with a lamp burning low and the November wind rattling the windows, Mrs. Brennan brought me tea and a message that made my blood run cold. The Dowager Duchess will be visiting tomorrow afternoon. Your Grace, she said. She wishes to speak with you about your future arrangements. My future arrangements. The words sounded ominous, final. I thanked Mrs. Brennan and waited until she had gone before allowing myself to panic. Why was the Dowager coming here? What had changed that required her personal attention? I barely slept that night, my mind turning over possibilities. By morning, I had decided on my strategy. I would be contrite, apologetic, everything a disgraced duchess should be. But I would also watch her carefully, listen for any slip or inconsistency that might reveal her true involvement in what had been done to me. She arrived at 2 o'clock, her carriage grand and imposing in the cottage's modest drive. I received her in the small drawing room, dressed simply but properly, my hair arranged with care and my expression schooled to appropriate humility. Helena, she said, settling into the best chair with the air of a monarch granting an audience. I have come to discuss the terms of your permanent situation. Permanent. The word hit me like a blow. I kept my hands folded in my lap, my face carefully neutral. "The Duke and I have consulted with our solicitors," she continued, her voice crisp and businesslike. "A divorce would be scandalous and damaging to the family name. Therefore, we have decided on a legal separation. You will remain Duchess of Winterbourne in name only. You will live here at the cottage permanently, with a small allowance for necessities. You will have no contact with London society, no correspondence with the family, and no claim on any Ashford property or assets beyond this residence. Essentially, I would cease to exist. I would be buried alive in this cottage, a ghost with a title and nothing more. And if I refuse?" I asked quietly. "Then we will pursue divorce," she said, leaning forward slightly, "and we will make certain that every detail of your infidelity is made public. Your name, your family's name, will be destroyed. Your father will lose his position in society. Your sisters will never marry well. Is that what you want, Helena? To drag everyone you love down with you?" I thought of my father, a kind man who had done his best with limited resources and too many daughters. I thought of my sisters, young and hopeful, dreaming of their own marriages and futures, and I understood that I had no choice. Not really. The Dowager held all the power, and she knew it. Unless I could prove my innocence, unless I could expose the truth about Constance Hartwick and her brother before the separation was finalized. "I understand," I said softly. "When will the papers be drawn up?" "Within the month," she said, satisfaction evident in her voice. "You will sign them here, with witnesses, and then the matter will be settled. You've made your bed, Helena. Now you must lie in it." After she left, I paced the cottage like a caged animal, my mind racing. A month. I had 1 month to find proof, to help the inspector build his case, to somehow turn this disaster around before I was legally trapped in exile forever. That night, I wrote another letter to Inspector Hargrave, this one more urgent, more desperate. I told him about the Dowager's visit, about the separation being planned. I told him I had 1 month, and that if he needed me to do anything, risk anything, I would. Because what did I have left to lose? My reputation was already destroyed, my marriage already over. The only thing I had left was the truth, and the small, fragile hope that justice might prevail. Mr. Pettigrew carried the letter away the next Thursday, and I waited once more, watching the lane and counting the days I had left. The response came faster this time, delivered after only 3 days. Another book, another letter hidden in its pages. "Your Grace, I am coming to you. I cannot do so openly, but I have arranged to visit the village as part of my investigation into the agency's operations. There is an inn, the King's Arms, on the north edge of Berkhamsted. Meet me there this Friday at noon. Come quietly, tell no one, and we will discuss what must be done next. We are running out of time, and I need your help to finish this. Trust me, William." He had signed it with his given name. That small intimacy, that breaking of formal protocol, meant more to me than I could express. He trusted me, believed in me, and was willing to risk his own reputation further by meeting me in secret. I pressed the letter to my chest and allowed myself a moment of weakness, of longing for something I could not have and should not want. But wanting, I was learning, had little to do with should, and Friday, I would see him again. Friday, we would plan how to catch a thief and a murderer. Friday, I would step out of this exile and back into the fight for my life. I prepared carefully. I told Mrs. Brennan I would be walking to the village for air and exercise, a reasonable request given my weeks of confinement. I dressed in my simplest gown, covered it with a heavy cloak, and tucked my hair up under a modest bonnet. I looked like any gentlewoman taking a country walk, nothing remarkable or memorable. The walk to Berkhamsted took 40 minutes, the November air sharp in my lungs and the landscape bare and beautiful in its winter starkness. I found the King's Arms easily, a respectable establishment on a quiet street, and slipped inside with my heart pounding so hard I feared it would give me away. Inspector Hargrave sat in a private dining room at the back, a pot of tea before him and his expression tense. He stood when I entered, and for a moment, we simply looked at each other. Two people who had been forced into this impossible situation and were somehow, against all reason, becoming partners in something that felt like more than just survival. "Your Grace," he said softly. "William," I replied, using his name for the first time, and watched something shift in his eyes. He pulled out a chair for me, and I sat, grateful to be off my feet, and grateful, too, for this small pocket of time where we could speak freely without fear of immediate discovery. "I don't have long," I said. "An hour? Perhaps 2 at most before my absence is noted." "Then we must be efficient," he said, pulling out his notebook. "I have news. Thomas Hartwick was arrested this morning. We found stolen items in a warehouse he owns near the docks. Jewelry, silver, art pieces, enough to convict him on multiple counts of theft." My breath caught. "That's wonderful," I said. "But what about the murder? What about his sister?" "That's where it becomes complicated," he said, his expression darkening. "Thomas claims he acted alone. He admits to the thefts, but denies any knowledge of the murder. And he refuses to implicate his sister, even when offered a reduced sentence in exchange for information." "He's protecting her," I said. "Or she's protecting herself," William countered. "Constance Hartwick disappeared 3 days ago. She left her position with Lady Hartley, claiming a family emergency, and has not been seen since. I believe she realized we were closing in and fled. So we have no proof she was involved in framing us," I said, despair creeping back in. "No proof of her connection to the murder. Not yet," he said. "But I have a theory. If I'm right, we can draw her out. But it will require you to do something dangerous, something that might expose you to further harm." "Tell me," I said, leaning forward. "I'll do whatever is necessary." He hesitated, conflict clear on his face. "I cannot ask this of you," he said quietly. "You've already lost so much." "William," I said, reaching across the table to touch his hand, a gesture so bold and improper that we both froze. "I have nothing left to lose. My marriage is over, my reputation destroyed, my future decided. The only thing I have left is the truth. And I will not spend the rest of my life in that cottage, buried alive, while the person who did this to us goes free." His hand turned beneath mine, his fingers threading through my own, warm and strong. "Very well," he said, "here is what we're going to do." The plan was audacious, risky, and perhaps our only chance. We would stage a meeting, publicly announced, between myself and the inspector. We would let it be known that I was providing testimony against the Ashford family, claiming that the Duke and Dowager had known about the thefts and had protected the criminals in exchange for some benefit. It was a lie, of course, but it would serve a purpose. If Constance Hartwick believed that I was about to expose connections that would lead back to her, if she thought I had evidence of her involvement, she might panic. She might make a mistake. And when she did, we would be watching. "It's dangerous," William said again, his hand still holding mine. "She's already killed once. If she believes you're a threat, she might try again." "Then we make certain she doesn't succeed," I said. "And we make certain we have witnesses, protection, everything we need to catch her in the act." We spent the next hour refining the details, planning the logistics. The meeting would be announced through careful channels, ensuring word would reach Constance wherever she was hiding. I would return to Winterbourne House, claiming I had evidence that would clear my name. The Duke would be forced to allow me entry, if only to prevent further scandal. And there, in the house where this had all begun, we would set our trap. When it was time to leave, William walked me to the door of the private dining room. We stood there in the dim hallway, close enough that I could smell the faint scent of tobacco and soap that clung to him, close enough to see the worry in his gray eyes. "Be careful," he said. "Please." "I will," I promised. "And William, thank you for believing in me, for fighting for me when no one else would." He reached up, his hand cupping my cheek in a gesture so tender it made my throat tighten. "I do not fight for you out of duty, Helena," he said quietly. "I fight for you because I have come to care for you more than is wise or proper. And when this is over, when we have caught the person who did this, I will have to step back and let you return to your life. But for now, for these few days we have left, know that you are not alone." I turned my face into his palm, allowing myself one moment of pure, stolen intimacy. Then I stepped back, straightened my bonnet, and became once more the disgraced Duchess preparing to return to exile. But inside, my heart was burning with something I had not felt in 3 years of marriage. Hope, fierce and fragile. And underneath it, deeper and more dangerous, something that felt very much like love. The message reached Winterbourne House 3 days after my meeting with William, carried by official channels and worded with careful precision to ensure it would not be ignored. Lady Helena Ashford requests audience with His Grace the Duke of Winterbourne regarding testimony she intends to provide to Scotland Yard concerning criminal activities connected to the family estate. Her cooperation is required for the ongoing investigation into theft and murder. Inspector William Hargrave, Scotland Yard. The Duke's response came within hours, terse and furious. "Return immediately. We will discuss this matter privately before any testimony is given." Edward. I traveled back to London in the same plain carriage that had carried me to exile, my hands folded in my lap and my heart beating with a mixture of fear and fierce determination. William had arranged for 2 constables to follow at a distance, watching the roads for any sign of trouble. Constance Hartwick was out there somewhere, he had told me, and desperate people did desperate things. If she believed I was about to expose her, she might strike before I reached the safety of Winterbourne House. But the journey passed without incident, and by evening I found myself standing once more in the grand entrance hall of the house that had been my prison long before I was sent to the cottage. Everything looked exactly as I had left it, the marble floors gleaming, the gas lamps burning, the portraits of dead Ashfords staring down with their judgmental eyes. Yet I felt different, changed in some fundamental way that I could not quite articulate. I was no longer the frightened woman who had been cast out in disgrace. I was someone who had learned to fight back. The Duke received me in his study, the Dowager standing beside his desk like a dark spectre of disapproval. Neither offered me a seat, neither greeted me with any warmth. I stood before them as a prisoner before judges, my back straight and my expression carefully neutral. "What is the meaning of this, Helena?" the Duke demanded, waving the message from William. "What testimony could you possibly provide? And why would you threaten this family with further scandal?" "I am not threatening anyone," I said calmly. "I am cooperating with a police investigation into crimes that have affected multiple households, including ours. Surely you would want justice served." "Justice," the Dowager said, her voice dripping with scorn. "Or revenge? You were caught in a compromising position with that inspector, and now you seek to deflect blame onto this family. It's pathetic, Helena." I met her gaze steadily, remembering William's warning to watch her carefully, to note any reaction that seemed excessive or revealing. "What I know," I said, "could be quite valuable to the investigation. Information about visitors to this house, about staff who came and went, about patterns that might connect to the thefts." The Duke's jaw tightened. "You will provide no such testimony. I forbid it. The family's name has been damaged enough by your behavior. I'm afraid that decision is not yours to make," I said quietly. "Inspector Hargrave has assured me that my cooperation is essential. If I refuse, I could be charged with obstruction of justice. It was a bluff, of course. William had no such power over me. But they didn't know that. And I watched their faces carefully for any sign of genuine concern or merely wounded pride." The Dowager moved closer, her eyes narrowing. "What exactly do you think you know, Helena? What could you possibly tell them that would be worth dragging us all through the mud?" I hesitated, as if weighing my words carefully, then said, "I know that Constance Hartwick served as your companion 3 months ago, and I know that her brother has been arrested for the thefts. I believe there may be connections that the police will want to explore." The effect of my words was immediate and telling. The Duke looked confused, clearly unfamiliar with the name. But the Dowager went very still, her face pale beneath her powder. "Miss Hartwick was a perfectly respectable young woman," she said, her voice controlled but strained. "She left my service to care for an elderly aunt. There is nothing suspicious about her employment here." "Perhaps not," I said. "But the police will want to verify that. They'll want to know what she had access to, what she might have learned while in this household." "This is absurd," the Duke snapped. "You're grasping at straws to save yourself from the consequences of your own actions." At that moment, the door opened and William entered, flanked by 2 constables. He must have been waiting in the hall, timing his entrance perfectly to interrupt before tensions could escalate further. "Your Grace," he said, nodding to the Duke. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I need to speak with Lady Helena. There have been developments in the case." The Duke bristled at the breach of protocol, but he could hardly refuse a police inspector conducting a murder investigation. "Very well," he said curtly. "Use the drawing room. But I expect a full accounting of whatever testimony my wife provides." William led me from the study, the constables remaining behind in the hallway. As soon as we were alone in the drawing room, he turned to me, his professional mask slipping to reveal concern. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I'm fine," I assured him. "But William, you should have seen the Dowager's face when I mentioned Constance Hartwick. She knows something. She's hiding something." He nodded grimly. "I suspected as much. That's why I'm here. We received word an hour ago. Constance Hartwick has been seen in London. She's not fleeing, Helena. She's here, in the city, and I believe she's coming for you." The room seemed to tilt. "Coming for me?" I whispered. "You're the only person who can connect her to this household, who might remember seeing her here or notice something suspicious about her time as the Dowager's companion. With her brother arrested and facing trial, she has nothing left to lose. If she can silence you before you testify, she might still escape." "Then we need to be ready for her," I said, fighting down the fear that threatened to overwhelm me. "We are," he said. "I have men watching the house, front and back. Every entrance is covered. If she tries to approach, we'll apprehend her. But Helena," he paused, his hand reaching out to touch my arm, "you need to stay in your room tonight. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone, not even servants you think you trust." "You believe she might try tonight?" I asked. "I believe she's desperate," he said, "and desperate people take desperate risks. The announcement of your testimony has been in all the evening papers. She knows you're here, knows you're planning to speak to the police. If she's going to act, it will be soon." A knock at the door made us both jump. Mr. Grimshaw entered, his expression apologetic. "Inspector, the Duke insists you complete your business and leave. It's past 9 o'clock, and he feels your presence is no longer appropriate." William's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Of course. Lady Helena, we'll speak again tomorrow morning. 10 o'clock. Until then, please remember what I said." I watched him leave, escorted by Mr. Grimshaw, and felt the weight of isolation settle over me once more. The house was full of people, servants and family, yet I had never felt more alone. I climbed the stairs to my old chambers, the rooms I had occupied during my marriage, and found them exactly as I had left them. Sarah had maintained them in my absence. The bed made, the furniture dusted, as if I had simply been away visiting and might return at any moment. Sarah arrived shortly after, her face flushed with emotion at seeing me again. "Your Grace," she breathed, embracing me in a gesture that would have been unthinkable before my exile. "I've missed you so terribly." "And I've missed you," I said, holding her close. "But Sarah, I need you to listen carefully. Inspector Hargrave believes I may be in danger tonight. I need you to make certain all the windows are locked, and then I want you to go to your own room and stay there. Don't come back no matter what you hear." She pulled back, her eyes wide with fear. "Your Grace, what's happening?" "I can't explain everything," I said. "But please, trust me. Go to your room and stay there until morning. Promise me." She promised, though reluctantly, and left after checking every window and helping me into my nightgown. I locked the door behind her, as William had instructed, and stood in the center of the room, listening to the old house settle around me. Every creak of floorboards, every distant sound seemed ominous now, fraught with threat. I did not undress for bed, instead pulling a wrapper over my nightgown and settling into the chair by the cold fireplace. I had no weapon, nothing with which to defend myself if Constance managed to breach William's careful watch, but I had my wits, and I had the knowledge that men were stationed outside, ready to intervene if I called for help. The hours crept by with agonizing slowness. 10 o'clock, 11, midnight. The house grew quieter as servants retired and family members sought their beds. I heard the Duke pass my door around midnight, his footsteps heavy and unhurried as he went to his own chambers. Then silence, deep and complete. At 1 o'clock, I heard something that made my blood run cold, a soft scratching sound coming from the direction of the window. I rose from my chair, my heart hammering, and moved closer. The curtains were drawn, blocking my view, but I could hear it clearly now. Something or someone was on the other side of the glass. I should have screamed, should have called for help. But some instinct made me hesitate, made me want to see who was there before I raised the alarm. I pulled back the curtain just an inch, peering out into the darkness. A woman's face stared back at me, pale and desperate in the moonlight. Constance Hartwick, I knew instantly, though I had never seen her before. She pressed her face close to the glass, her lips moving, forming words I could not hear. Then she held up something that made my blood freeze, a piece of paper pressed against the window. On it, written in large letters, was a message. "She knows. The Dowager knows everything. She planned this. Let me in, or we both hang." I stood frozen, my mind racing. This was a trap, surely. Constance trying to gain entry by claiming the Dowager was the real villain. And yet, I thought of the Dowager's reaction when I mentioned Constance's name. The fear in her eyes, the too quick denial. What if there was truth to this claim? What if the Dowager had been involved all along? Constance's face showed raw desperation now, tears streaming down her cheeks. She pointed to the window latch, gesturing frantically for me to open it. Then she held up another note. "Please, you're the only one who can help me prove the truth?" Thomas took the blame for her. She threatened my family. I backed away from the window, my thoughts in turmoil. If I let her in, I might be allowing a murderer into my room. But if I didn't, if she was telling the truth and the Dowager was somehow orchestrated this entire nightmare, I might be condemning an innocent woman and letting the real criminal go free. Constance was mouthing something now, her face pressed against the glass. I tried to read her lips, to understand what she was saying. Then I heard it, faint but unmistakable. The sound of the door handle to my room being tested. Someone was trying to open my locked door. I spun around, my eyes fixed on the handle as it turned slowly, deliberately, then stopped. A moment of silence, then a key scraped in the lock, metal against metal, and I understood with horrible clarity that someone had a key to my chambers. Someone who could bypass the lock I had thought would keep me safe. The door opened, and the Dowager Duchess stepped inside, a small pistol in her gloved hand. "Helena," she said softly, her voice eerily calm. "I had hoped it wouldn't come to this. I truly had. But you've left me no choice." Behind me, I heard the window shatter as Constance broke through the glass, climbing into the room with desperate urgency. The dowager swung the pistol toward her, her expression hardening. "Don't move, Constance," she commanded. "Not another step, or I will shoot you both and claim it was self-defense against intruders." I stood between them, trapped, as the two women faced each other across my bedroom. Outside, I could hear shouts, running feet, the sounds of William's men realizing something had gone wrong. But they were too far away, too late to stop what was about to happen. "You killed her," Constance said, her voice breaking. "You killed Mrs. Wycliffe because she recognized you, not me. You. You were the one stealing from your own class, using my brother's agency as cover." The dowager laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Catherine Wycliffe was a fool who couldn't keep her mouth shut. She saw me at a function wearing a brooch she thought had been stolen from her collection, started asking questions, making accusations. I had no choice but to silence her. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why steal from people who trusted you? You have wealth, position, everything." "Had," the dowager corrected, her eyes glittering with rage. "Past tense, Helena. My late husband left me nothing but debts. The estates are entailed to Edward. The investments are controlled by trustees. I was given a pittance to live on while maintaining appearances. Do you know what that's like? To be surrounded by wealth you can't touch, to see younger women dripping in jewels while you're forced to wear the same pieces year after year? So you stole from them," I said, understanding dawning. "You cultivated friendships, visited their homes, noted what they had. Then you used Constance's brother's agency to gain access, to steal what you thought you deserved." "I took what should have been mine by right," she said coldly, "and I would have continued if that inspector hadn't started poking around." That's when I realized I needed a distraction. A scandal so shocking that it would occupy everyone's attention while I disappeared with what I'd already taken. "Me," I whispered. "You chose me." "You were perfect," she said, almost admiringly. "Young, beautiful, unhappy in your marriage. Easy to frame for infidelity with a handsome inspector. And when you were exiled, disgraced, who would believe anything you said? You became irrelevant, powerless, the perfect scapegoat." "And Constance?" I asked. "Was meant to take the fall if things went wrong," the dowager said. "Her brother was already sloppy, already drawing attention. I made certain evidence would point to them, made certain that when arrests came, they would be the ones caught. Constance was my companion. She knew too much, saw too much. She had to be silenced or implicated. Either way, she couldn't be allowed to speak." "But Thomas confessed," Constance said, her voice shaking. "He's sitting in prison right now, facing the gallows to protect our mother from your threats. You said you'd have her arrested for conspiracy if we didn't cooperate. A useful tool, leverage," the dowager said. "People will do remarkable things to protect those they love." The door burst open behind her, and William rushed in, 2 constables at his heels. The dowager spun, the pistol now aimed at him. "Stop," she commanded. "All of you, stay back, or I'll shoot." William raised his hands slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. "Your Grace, please, put down the weapon. It's over. We heard everything. The constables in the hallway heard your confession. For a moment, I thought she might actually do it, might pull the trigger and end this in blood and chaos. But then something in her face crumbled, the rigid control shattering to reveal the desperate, angry woman beneath. The pistol lowered, her hand trembling, and William moved forward carefully to take it from her. "Lady Helena Ashford," he said formally, his voice carrying the weight of official authority. "I apologize on behalf of Scotland Yard for the injustice done to you. You are completely cleared of all suspicion. And Lady Catherine Winterbourne, Dowager Duchess, you are under arrest for theft, fraud, conspiracy, and the murder of Mrs. Catherine Wycliffe." The constables moved to take her, and she allowed it with strange docility, as if all the fight had drained out of her in an instant. As they led her past me, she paused, her eyes meeting mine. "You should have stayed in the cottage, Helena," she said quietly. "You should have accepted your fate. life would have been simpler for everyone. Perhaps, I said. But I've learned that simple and right are not always the same thing. They took her away, and suddenly the room was full of people. The Duke, roused from his bed, stood in the doorway in his dressing gown, his face ashen as he tried to comprehend what had happened. Servants clustered in the hallway, whispering and staring. And Constance Hartwick sat on my bed, sobbing with relief and exhaustion, free at last from the nightmare that had consumed her family. William came to me, his hands gently taking my arms. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently. "No," I said. "Thanks to you." If your men hadn't been listening at the door, if they hadn't heard her confession. "I stationed them there specifically," he said. "I suspected she might come for you herself. She's been too involved in your exile, too insistent on keeping you isolated." It made sense that she had more to hide than simple family pride. The Duke approached us, his movements uncertain. "Helena," he said, his voice rough with emotion I'd never heard from him before. "I owe you an apology, more than an apology. I condemned you without evidence, without even listening to your side. I failed you as a husband." I looked at him, this man I had married without love and lived beside without joy, and felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction at his admission, nothing. Whatever connection we might have had, it had died long before this night. "The marriage was a mistake for both of us, Edward," I said gently. "We both know that. Perhaps now we can finally be honest about it." He nodded slowly, defeat in his eyes. "The separation papers will be destroyed. You'll have everything you need, everything I can provide to help you start a new life. It's the least I can do." After he left, after the servants were dismissed and Constance was escorted to a guest room where she could rest safely, I found myself alone with William. He still wore his coat and hat, ready to return to his duties, but he hesitated at the door. "Where will you go?" he asked quietly. "When this is all settled?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Away from London, certainly. Away from society and scandal. Perhaps somewhere I can simply be Helena again, not the Duchess, not the disgraced wife, just myself." He nodded, understanding in his gray eyes. "I hope," he said carefully, "that wherever you go, you'll be happy." "You deserve happiness, Helena. You deserve more than this world has given you." "And you, William?" I asked. "What will you do?" "Return to my work," he said with a small smile. "Solve crimes. Chase criminals. Try to make London a bit safer. It's not glamorous, but it's mine." I crossed the room to stand before him, close enough to see the weariness in his face, the shadow of beard on his jaw, all the small human details that made him real and dear to me. "William," I said softly, "if things were different, if I were different." "But they're not," he said gently, cutting off the words I couldn't quite speak. "You're a duchess, even if you're leaving that world, and I'm an inspector who'll never be more than working class, no matter how many cases I solve. The world doesn't forgive such mismatches, Helena. We both know that." "Perhaps the world is wrong," I whispered. "Perhaps it is," he agreed. "But we still have to live in it." He lifted my hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to my palm that sent warmth flooding through me. Then he released me, stepped back, and was once more Inspector William Hargrave of Scotland Yard, professional and proper and utterly out of reach. "Good night, Your Grace," he said. "Good night, Inspector," I replied. And then he was gone, and I was alone in my room with its broken window and the scent of gunpowder still faint in the air. I sat on the edge of my bed and allowed myself, finally, to cry. Not for my ruined reputation or my failed marriage, but for something I had found too late and would have to let go. For a man who believed in me, who fought for me, who saw me as more than a title or a scandal. A man I could have loved if circumstances had been different, if the world had been kinder. But the world was what it was, and tomorrow I would begin the work of building a life in it. A life that was mine alone, earned through survival and courage rather than given through marriage or birth. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be what I had imagined when I was a girl dreaming of romance and adventure. But it would be real, and it would be honest, and perhaps in time it would even be enough. The trial of Catherine Ashford, Dowager Duchess of Winterbourne, became the scandal of the season, filling the newspapers and dominating conversations in every drawing room from Mayfair to Belgravia. Society, always hungry for spectacle, devoured every detail with relish. A duchess, arrested for murder and theft. A respectable family torn apart by greed and desperation. And at the center of it all, a young woman vindicated after weeks of disgrace. I attended the trial only once, on the day the verdict was read. I sat in the public gallery, dressed simply in gray, my face veiled to avoid recognition. The dowager stood in the dock with the same rigid posture she had always maintained, her black gown immaculate, her expression revealing nothing. But when the judge pronounced her guilty on all charges and sentenced her to hang, I saw something flicker across her face. Not remorse exactly, but perhaps a kind of relief that the performance was finally over. She looked up into the gallery then, her eyes somehow finding mine through the crowd and the veil. We held each other's gaze for a long moment, two women who had been trapped by the same system in different ways. She had chosen theft and murder to escape her cage. I had chosen truth and courage. Neither of us would ever be free in the way we had once imagined, but at least I would live to see another day. After the trial, the Duke summoned me to his solicitor's office to discuss the settlement. He was generous, I'll give him that. The separation was formalized with terms that provided me with a comfortable income, a small house in Bath, and the quiet understanding that we would never speak of each other again. He would eventually remarry, find a younger woman who might give him the heir his mother had died waiting for, and I would disappear from his life as completely as if I had never existed. I have only one request, I told him during that final meeting. I want Sarah to come with me. She's been loyal beyond measure, and I'll need a companion. He agreed without hesitation, perhaps grateful that I asked for so little. And so it was arranged. Helena Ashford, no longer Duchess, simply a woman with a past and an uncertain future, would leave London and begin again. But before I left, there was one more thing I needed to do. I sent word to William through official channels, asking him to meet me one final time. Not at his lodgings, not at Winterbourne House, but at a small park near Regent's Canal, a place where we could walk together without scandal or speculation, a place where, for just a few hours, we could be simply William and Helena, two people who had survived something terrible and come out the other side changed. He arrived at 2 o'clock on a cold December afternoon, the sky heavy with the promise of snow. I saw him waiting by the gate, his coat collar turned up against the wind, and my heart did something complicated and painful in my chest. "Inspector," I said as I approached. "Your Grace," he replied, then corrected himself with a small smile. "Or should I say simply Helena now?" "Simply Helena sounds perfect," I said. We walked together along the path beside the canal, the water gray and still beneath the winter sky. For a time, neither of us spoke. Content just to be in each other's presence without the weight of investigation or scandal pressing down on us. "I leave for Bath tomorrow," I said finally. "The house is ready, and Sarah has already sent most of my things ahead." "Bath is lovely," he said. "You'll like it there. Quieter than London, but still civilized enough not to feel like exile." "That's what I'm hoping for," I said. "A place where I can simply exist without constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering who's judging me or what rumors are circulating." He stopped walking, turning to face me. "Helena," he said, and the sound of my name on his lips made me ache. "What happened to you was unconscionable. What she did, what society did, allowing you to be ruined before anyone even asked for your side of the story. It makes me angry in ways I can't fully express. But it also made me stronger, I said. I never would have fought back if I hadn't been pushed to the edge. I would have stayed in that empty marriage, playing the perfect duchess, slowly disappearing until there was nothing left of the girl I used to be. In a strange way, the scandal saved me. I wish it could have saved you in a way that didn't require you to lose everything, he said quietly. Not everything, I corrected, holding his gaze. I still have my dignity. I have my freedom, such as it is. And I have the knowledge that somewhere in this city, there's a man who believed in me when no one else did. That's worth more than any title or position. His hand reached out, tucking a strand of hair that had escaped my bonnet back behind my ear. The gesture was tender, intimate, and completely improper. I didn't care. I need to tell you something, he said, his voice rough with emotion. And I need you to let me say it completely before you respond. Can you do that? I nodded, not trusting my voice. When this case first brought me to your door, you were just another witness to interview, another piece of the puzzle I needed to solve. But then I saw you, really saw you, and I realized you were so much more than a title or a role. You were intelligent and kind, and trapped in a life that was slowly suffocating you. And over these weeks, working beside you, watching you refuse to break, even when everything was stacked against you, I fell in love with you. My breath caught, tears suddenly blurring my vision. I know I have no right, he continued. I'm a working man with no fortune, no name, nothing to offer someone like you. And I know that even now, even separated from the Duke, society would never accept us together. But I needed you to know, before you leave for Bath, before we go our separate ways, that you are loved, truly, deeply loved. And that wherever you go, whatever life you build for yourself, you take my heart with you. I couldn't speak through the tears, so I did the only thing I could think of. I stepped forward and kissed him, there on the path beside the canal where anyone might see. His arms came around me immediately, holding me close, and for one perfect moment, the world fell away and there was nothing but us, nothing but this feeling of rightness that defied all logic and propriety. When we finally pulled apart, both breathless and trembling, I rested my forehead against his chest and let him hold me. I love you too, I whispered. God help me, I do. But William, you were right that night at Winterbourne House. The world doesn't forgive mismatches like ours. If we tried to be together, your career would be destroyed. You'd be seen as the inspector who seduced a duchess, who broke up a noble marriage for his own gain. They'd ruin you. Then let them, he said fiercely. I don't care. But I do, I said, pulling back to look at him. I care about your work, about the good you do, about the people who need someone like you, fighting for justice. I won't be the reason you lose that. I won't be another cage that traps you. So what do we do? He asked, pain evident in every word. Just walk away from this? Pretend we don't feel what we feel? I took his face in my hands, memorizing every detail. The gray eyes that had seen through my masks, the strong jaw, the lines beginning to form at the corners of his eyes from too many late nights and difficult cases. We wait, I said. We give society time to forget about me, to move on to the next scandal. We let the gossip die down. And then, when enough time has passed that no one connects us to that case anymore, you come to Bath, not as Inspector Hargrave investigating a duchess, just as William, visiting a friend named Helena. How long? He asked. A year, perhaps, I said. Maybe 2. Long enough that when people see us together, if they see us together, they'll think we met after all this drama. They'll see a respectable widow, because that's how I'll present myself, and a hard-working professional man. Nothing scandalous, nothing to ruin either of us. Can you wait that long? He asked, his thumb brushing away the tears on my cheek. Can you? I countered. For you, he said, yes, I'll wait however long it takes. And Helena, when I do come to Bath, when enough time has passed and we can finally be together without destroying each other, I'm going to ask you properly. Not in a park where anyone might see, but somewhere private and perfect. And I'm going to ask you to marry me. And I'll say yes, I promised. I'll say yes, and we'll build a life together that's nothing like the one I had. It will be simple and real and based on love instead of duty. We'll probably scandalize the neighbors and bore the dinner party guests with our happiness. He laughed then, a sound of pure joy, and kissed me again. This time gentler, a promise rather than a goodbye. We spent another hour walking beside the canal, talking about our plans and dreams. He told me about cases he was working on, about his hope to eventually rise to chief inspector. I told him about the house in Bath, about my plan to perhaps volunteer at a women's charity or learn to paint properly instead of just playing at it like ladies were expected to do. We talked about books and music and everything except the fact that in a few hours I would board a train and leave London behind. When it was time to part, when the winter light was fading and propriety demanded we end this improper meeting, he walked me to where my carriage waited. 2 years, he said, as if making an oath. 2 years, and then I'm coming for you. I'll be waiting, I promised. I watched him walk away until he disappeared around a corner, and then I climbed into the carriage and allowed myself to cry properly. Not sad tears, exactly, but tears of release, of grief for what I was leaving behind and hope for what might come. Sarah, sitting beside me, took my hand without saying anything, understanding in the way only a true friend could. The next morning, I boarded the train to Bath with Sarah beside me, and all my worldly possessions reduced to what would fit in 3 trunks. As the train pulled out of the station and London fell away behind me, I pressed my hand against the window and whispered a prayer to whatever force might be listening. Let him be safe. Let him succeed. Let time pass quickly for both of us. Bath welcomed me with gray skies and rain, but I found I didn't mind. The house the Duke had provided was small by aristocratic standards, but perfect for my needs. 3 bedrooms, a sitting room, a dining room, and a tiny garden that I immediately began planning to fill with flowers come spring. The neighbors were polite but not overly curious, content to let the quiet widow who had moved into number 17 keep to herself. I established a routine. Morning walks through the Royal Crescent, afternoons reading or painting in my sitting room, evenings with Sarah, playing cards or working on needlework while we talked about everything and nothing. I volunteered twice a week at a charity that helped young women who had fallen on hard times, using my own experience of near ruin to counsel them about resilience and hope. And I waited. Letters came from William, carefully worded and sent through circuitous routes to avoid suspicion. He told me about his cases, about his promotion to senior inspector, about the growing respect he was earning at Scotland Yard. I told him about my new life, about the small joys I was discovering in simple things, about how I was learning to be happy in ways I had never been before. The first year passed slowly, each month marked by his letters and my responses. I learned patience. I learned that love could survive distance and time if both people were willing to fight for it. The second year passed more quickly, as if time itself understood that we had waited long enough. And then, on a morning in late spring when Bath was alive with flowers and warmth, a telegram arrived. Arriving Thursday, 2 o'clock, platform 3, William. I barely slept that Wednesday night, my mind racing with anticipation and fear. What if seeing each other again wasn't the same? What if the feelings we'd nurtured through letters had been an illusion, romantic, but ultimately fragile? What if society still remembered, still judged, still tried to tear us apart? But when I saw him standing on the platform, a small bag in one hand and that familiar smile on his face, all my fears evaporated like morning mist. He looked older, more distinguished, with threads of silver starting to show at his temples. But his eyes were the same, warm and full of love, and when he swept me into his arms right there on the crowded platform, I knew with absolute certainty that we had made the right choice to wait. That evening, after he had settled into a room at a respectable hotel, after we had taken tea together in my sitting room while Sarah played chaperone with twinkling eyes, after we had talked for hours about everything that had happened in the 2 years we'd been apart, he took my hand and led me to the tiny garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Somewhere nearby, a bird was singing, and in that perfect moment, William Hargrave, former Inspector of Scotland Yard, knelt before me on the damp grass and took both my hands in his. "Helena," he said, his voice shaking slightly with emotion. "I've rehearsed this speech 100 times, but now that I'm here, all those perfect words have fled. So I'll simply tell you the truth. You are the bravest, most extraordinary person I've ever known. You survived scandal and betrayal and came out stronger. You rebuilt your life from nothing and created something beautiful. And I want nothing more than to spend the rest of my days by your side, loving you, supporting you, and being grateful that fate brought us together, even in the darkest circumstances. Will you marry me? Will you let me be the man who gets to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night?" "Yes," I said through happy tears. "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." He stood and kissed me as the sun set behind us, as Sarah applauded from the window, as the world spun on and the past finally released its hold on us. We married quietly 3 months later in a small church on the outskirts of Bath. No grand ceremony, no society guests, just William and me, Sarah and a few friends we'd made, and a priest who didn't care about titles or scandals, only about the love evident between us. I wore a simple dress of cream silk. William wore his best suit. And when he slid the ring onto my finger and the priest pronounced us husband and wife, I felt something I had never felt during my first marriage. I felt free. Our life together was everything we'd promised it would be. Simple, honest, full of love. William opened a private investigation firm in Bath, helping people who couldn't afford Scotland Yard's attention. I continued my charity work and discovered I had a talent for helping women navigate the complicated social and legal systems that so often trapped them. We never became fashionable or famous. We never moved in the circles I had once inhabited as a duchess. But we were happy. Truly, deeply happy. Sometimes, late at night when we lay together in our bed, William would ask me if I regretted any of it. The scandal, the exile, the loss of my position in society. And I would tell him the truth, that given the choice, I would walk through it all again. Because it led me here, to this man, to this life, to this moment of perfect contentment. The Dowager Duchess was executed 6 months after her trial, unrepentant to the end. The Duke remarried within the year, as I knew he would, and produced an heir within 2 years of that. I heard the news without pain or jealousy, simply grateful that he had found what he needed, and I had found what I needed, and that we had both been brave enough to admit our first attempt had been a mistake. Thomas Hartwick was released after serving 5 years, his sentence reduced due to his sister's testimony at the Dowager's trial. He moved to America, I heard, seeking a fresh start where his name meant nothing. Constance married a clerk and moved to Scotland, determined to leave London and its memories behind. And me? I became simply Helena Hargrave, wife of William, friend to many, and a woman who had learned that sometimes the greatest gift life can give you is the chance to start over, to shed the skin of who you were supposed to be and become who you were meant to be all along. On our 5th anniversary, William surprised me with a trip to London. We walked through Regent's Park, past the canal where we had said goodbye all those years ago, and I felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for the scandal that had set me free. Gratitude for the inspector who had believed in me. Gratitude for a love that had been tested by time and distance and had emerged stronger for it. We stopped at a bench and sat watching the afternoon light play across the water. William took my hand, threading his fingers through mine in the casual intimacy of long marriage. "Do you remember what you told me that day?" he asked. "When I said I loved you and you said we had to wait?" "I remember everything about that day," I said. "You told me you wouldn't be another cage that trapped me," he said, his voice soft with emotion. "But Helena, you were never a cage. You were the key that unlocked every door I'd ever closed. You gave me permission to be more than just an inspector, more than just a working-class boy trying to prove himself. You gave me the courage to want more, to dream bigger, to believe that love could conquer circumstances." "And you gave me back myself," I said. "The girl I'd been before marriage and duty and society tried to reshape me into something acceptable. You saw her, even when she was buried under years of pretending, and you loved her anyway." We sat there until the sun began to set, two people who had survived scandal and emerged victorious. Not because society had forgiven us or forgotten what had happened, but because we had forgiven ourselves and refused to let other people's judgments define our worth. That night, in our hotel room overlooking the Thames, William held me close and whispered promises into my hair. Promises of tomorrow and next week and all the years we had left together. And I whispered back my own promises, knowing that unlike the vows I had spoken in that cold church 7 years ago, these promises were built on truth and choice and love. I swore fidelity once to a man I barely knew, in front of witnesses who judged me before I ever had a chance to prove myself. But the fidelity that mattered, the fidelity that endured, was the promise I made to myself. To be honest, to be brave, to fight for truth even when it cost me everything. And in the end, that fidelity to myself led me to a fidelity worth having. To a man who loved me not for my title or my position, but for the strength he saw in me even when I couldn't see it myself. To a life built on partnership and respect and the quiet knowledge that we had chosen each other freely and completely, against all odds. The gate log had placed me in his room at 02:11, a lie meant to destroy us both. But sometimes, I thought as I fell asleep in William's arms, the greatest truths grow from the darkest lies. Because that false entry, that fabricated scandal, had set in motion a chain of events that freed me from a life I never wanted and delivered me to one I never dared to dream of. I was a duchess who swore fidelity and lost everything. But I was also Helena, a woman who learned that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find what truly matters. And what mattered, what had always mattered beneath the titles and the scandal and the judgment, was this: love freely given, truth courageously spoken, and the unshakable belief that we are all worthy of a second chance, a fresh start, and the courage to write our own endings. My story began with a lie written in a gate log at 02:11, but it ended with a truth written in my heart. That fidelity, real fidelity, belongs not to duty or society or the names we're given. It belongs to the people we choose to love, the lives we choose to build, and the version of ourselves we have the courage to become. And I chose well, I chose bravely, I chose love, and I would choose it again every single day for the rest of my life.